Before there were podcast apps, hosting platforms, or analytics dashboards, there was Rob Walsh, hand-coding RSS feeds in his basement and building the foundation of a $130 billion industry. This Podcast Hall of Fame inductee didn't just witness podcasting's birth in 2004, he helped deliver it. Welcome to the Podcasting Secrets Show, where successful creators share their best stories, secrets, and strategies. I'm your host, Nathan Gwilliam. Hello, incurable creators, and welcome to this episode of the Podcasting Secrets Show. Our guest today is Rob Walch. He's the Vice President of Podcaster Relations at Libsyn and a true pioneer who's helped build the podcasting industry from the ground up. In 2004, when podcasting was just an idea and no tools existed, Rob launched Podcast 411. That was the first podcast about podcasting, teaching himself to hand code RSS feeds in the process. As co-author of Tricks of the Podcasting Masters and a 2016 Podcast Hall of Fame inductee, Rob has spent nearly 2 decades supporting independent creators and shaping how podcasting evolved globally. Through his work at Libsyn and as co-host of The Feed, Rob continues his mission to empower podcasters with the data, tools, and guidance they need to succeed in today's competitive audio landscape. Thanks so much for joining us today, Rob.
Nathan, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Okay, Rob, I know you've already published a whole bunch. Can you start off by sharing with us something that not everybody already knows about you?
I was a cheerleader at a D1 school in college.
Wow. Which school was that?
University of Dayton.
Okay, very nice. Can you start off? Let's go to story time here. What can you share with us your story to become an expert podcaster?
Lots of time. It's practice. I just happened to be the right place, the right time. Started podcasting in late 2004 when it was just getting started. And I was a big fan of Inside the Actors Studio. So I decided I'm going to do a podcast about interviewing other podcasters and find out how they do things. So I learned and became, good at podcasting by learning all my guests knew. I started assimilating their knowledge. I would bring them on the show and suck their brain dry for tips and tricks on how to promote a show, how to grow a show, how to monetize a show, how to create a show, how not to create a show. I think my journey was just really learning from all the other podcasters that were doing it, trying to get an aggregate knowledge base.
You kind of got your master's degree by doing a podcast.
Yeah.
You got your master's degree in podcasting by doing a podcast.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I mean, because back then I would ask people, well, how are you doing this? And they'd be like, oh, I don't know. If you can figure that out, let me know. And be like, okay, well, now I got to find someone who's doing it to interview them to see how they're doing it. And it was a lot of that. And then early on, even just, there was no easy way to do a recording of an interview. We would using Skype and recording Skype calls. That was how we did it. And there was no easy way to do that. We'd use programs like Soundflower and other things. And ultimately came up with a hardware solution that one of my listeners and someone I interviewed said, here's how you should do it. And it was a hardware solution where I brought the audio out and I split my audio from my microphone so they could hear me. And then that audio, the good audio went to a mixer and then off to a digital recorder. But this was all well before there was Descript and well before there was Riverside and well before there was any of these tools. It was GarageBand, Soundflower, and hardware.
Yeah, you were on the bleeding edge of podcasting. Well, thank you for your pioneering innovation that's helped make it possible for the rest of us.
It was a lot of fun, and it was a very communal feel, especially in the early days. Well before Apple was supporting podcasting. It was, we were just doing it. Everyone was doing it, trying to help each other. And so that's some of that's still alive today and in different groups and different podcasts. And it's fun to talk with different podcasters, like being on the show here and being able to share and bounce ideas off of one another on how do you grow a show. Because, there's always people still to this day, I think, one of the questions I still get is, how do you grow a show? How do you grow a show? And everyone's looking for this magic silver bullet. Oh, sign up for this service and you guaranteed downloads. Well, no, that's not it. That's not growing an audience. That's just inflating your stats. How you actually grow an audience. That's really the tough thing.
Get real listeners that'll know you, like you, and trust you. Come back. Yeah. So what advice do you have for those people? What have you found that does work to grow an audience?
The biggest thing, when I talked to a lot of the big shows about what did they do to grow, a lot of them said nothing. And they said they let their audience do it. So what I found to help grow is interacting with your audience, making your audience part of the show, having them send you feedback, and getting that feedback out of them is tough. A lot of times, a lot of people would say, "Oh, I would use listener feedback every episode if I had any." But you have to just constantly be on your audience saying, "Hey, send me in feedback, send me in questions, send me in audio file." I have 206-666-4357. That was 206 Mom Help. I tell people call in and leave me some voicemail, and I'll use it on the show. Really, I say reaching out to your audience and asking them to participate in your show, because once they do, then they are part of your show, and then they become advocates and acolytes for your show, and they tell their friends about how smart you are for having them on your show, and they start really promoting your show out there. More so, if you get 100 people listening to your show, promoting your show, they're going to do a much better job in aggregate than you can as a single person.
We've been working with Delilah. She's the #1 female radio personality in America, and she's been asking for a feature very similar to this that I haven't seen hardly any podcasters use, where you could take that kind of radio call-in show feature like you were describing there, and open that up to all of the listeners of all the podcasts, and get the video and the audio, and then include it in your future episodes. What tools have you seen currently that could provide that kind of a feature?
I mean, honestly, just having a call-in number, getting a Google call-in number, or I use K7.net, I think it is, or Call 8, and where that was the 206 number I mentioned. And having that call-in number is one way. The other thing is telling people just to record it on their voice recorder app on their phone and email it to your Gmail account, sending recordings that way. It doesn't really matter how they get it to you, just as long as they get it. There's SpeakPipe. We still use speakpipe.com is another good service to get voicemail messages. So there's various services out there. But
I have heard of SpeakPipe. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but I always say don't even limit yourself to one. You want to encourage people to send you how they want to send it to you. So have a call-in number. So this way, if they're in the car and you say something that's incredibly insightful or really pisses them off, whatever it is, it causes them to want to give you feedback, they can just say, "Hey Siri, call 206-666-4357. And then they'll give me voicemail feedback from the car. Now, sometimes they would do that, and they would send me voicemail feedback from the car when they were in a convertible, and that was not good. So then I'd have to say, don't do it from the convertible when your roof's down. And then I learned all about Adobe software and sweetening up and cleaning up voicemail feedback to make it legible.
And I guess if they wanted to send it in video form for a video podcast, they just record it on their phone and send that over.
Right. Yeah.
So I use Libsyn for my first show. I've recorded hundreds and hundreds of episodes on Libsyn. I love the Libsyn, what Libsyn has done for me in my career, and grateful for what you guys have made possible there. Tell me about your journey of working for one of the pioneering startups of podcasting software, and how long have you been there at Libsyn?
I will be at Libsyn in July, so in 2 months I'll be there 18 years.
Oh my goodness!
And I've been a customer of Libsyn for over 20 years. So
wow.
I started as a Libsyn customer. So when I started my show, I was hosting on my own server and domain, and my show started getting popular, and it started costing me money. So I became friends with and got to be acquaintances with the guys that started Libsyn, and I said, well, I got to move my show over. So I moved my show over in March of 2005 because I had a big interview coming up with Senator John Edwards, who had just run as the vice presidential candidate in November of 2004. and I knew that was going to be a big interview, and it would have cost me lots of money. So I got over to Libsyn right before that interview went up, and I've been hosting and paying for a Libsyn account for over 20 years.
Nice.
And I, as a customer for 2 years plus, I was promoting Libsyn all the time on Podcast 411, and the guys came to me at the start and said, "Hey, you promote us all the time. Do you want a job?" And I said, "Absolutely." And that was a great decision. And I've been at Libsyn now 18, it'll be 18 years in July.
Well, it sounds like they're lucky to have you. I remember, I think I signed up for the $15 a month plan in Libsyn, and I think within 2 months, because I was doing a daily show, and so I think I was up to the $150 a month plan within like 2 months or 3 months or something of signing up. So I was one of the power users in there. Can you tell us a story of the early days of in your journey at Libsyn, something fun that you'd feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah, no, a lot of people know Joe Rogan, who he is now, and he's obviously the biggest podcast. It's not even close. But when he started out, he started with his other company, and it was maybe a month or two into when he had started podcasting, and one of my friends said, "Hey, you've got to listen to Joe's show today." And I go and I listen, and it's Joe talking about, "Hey, I'm sorry, if you didn't get the episode yesterday, the place I'm hosting can't handle the traffic." So I went and emailed him, because his email was inside the RSS feed, and I emailed him. I said, "Hey, Joe, we host Mark Maron and Jimmy Pardo and Keith and the Girl and some other comedy podcasts you may have heard of. Love to have you come on over." And 15 minutes later, the phone rings, and I pick up and look low, and he goes, "This is Joe." I'm like, "Joe who?" He goes, "Joe Rogan. You just sent me an email." And I'm like, "What?" So I didn't expect him to call. I just said, "Yeah, Joe, I'm sorry. I mean, I didn't expect you to call. I expect maybe your assistant or, your producer." He goes, "I'm the producer." He goes, "I do the show." He goes, "I upload the files." And I'm like, "Oh." So we got talking, and he's like, tells me that he was the first comedian to have his own website, and he had hand coded it in CSS and HTML. So,
Wow.
So a lot of people don't realize how techy and involved Joe is. I mean, he's not just funny guy that knows MMA. He's a Renaissance guy. Whatever he gets in and behind, he really becomes a master of it. So, and then later on, I brought Joe his first, I could say his first legitimate advertiser, because up until then, his main advertiser was Fleshlight, and if you don't know what it is, don't Google it at work. Wait till you get home. And I had a couple of advertisers that wanted to advertise on his show, and they were like, "Man, we can't be next to Fleshlight." And so I was just like, "Hey, Joe, how are you about maybe getting rid of them as an advertiser?" He goes, "Well, they bought me out," and he told me how much it was. And I'm like, "Is that it for an episode?" He said, "No, it's for the whole month." I'm like, "That's not a lot." I'm like, "Go ahead and let them know this is your last month." Yeah, we got some advertisers for you, and now Joe, brings in more ad revenue, and it's the biggest show out there. So it was just fun to see his growth. And in the early days, he wasn't even, when he first came over, he wasn't even top 20 show that was hosted with us. It took him a little bit of time to grow, and then he finally got to the point where it just took off. And now he's an order of magnitude above everyone else.
Yeah. So when you were telling your initial story, you talked about Podcast 411 and all these secrets and tips that you learned from everybody you interviewed. Are there any of those secrets or tips that really resonated with you that have stuck with you today?
When in doubt, edit yourself out. That was always my key thing that stuck with me when I was doing my editing. Like if I'm editing a guest and I start going off on some tangent or rant in a conversation, it's fine, but it's not what my listeners were there for. They were there for the guest. And I was trying to remind myself that I'll edit myself out, make sure the focus of the episode, at least the interview part of the episode, is on the guest. I have plenty of time to speak before and after the interview, but during the interview, I tried to, outside of just adding in some comedy or whatever, I tried to make it mostly about the guest. So I still believe that phrase, and to this day when I do my editing, and I always edit out the ums, the uhs, the knows, because I tried to make the guest sound as good as they possibly could, knowing that if they felt good about how the interview sounded, how they sounded in the interview, they would be more likely to promote it. There was so many times I've heard an interview where the person had never talked before and they got on the podcast and they were nervous and they were stammering and stuttering, doing a lot of
Yeah.
and the person didn't edit it out. And I can't imagine that the person that was the guest heard that and wanted to promote that. I'm like, because the guest didn't sound educated, didn't sound confident. And I know I wouldn't have promoted that. So I tried really hard to make my guests sound as brilliant as they possibly could. And that way they would not only just promote it, they would sometimes put links to the interviews I did with them on the front page of their website.
Yeah, great way to promote your podcast. You mentioned earlier that when you asked people on your show, when you asked podcasting experts how they grew, most of them said nothing, or many of them said nothing. When I ask that question on my show, the most common answer I get is they get on other shows, right? They get on other related shows. And when we make people look great on our shows, we get invited on other shows, right? That's the biggest secret to get that promotion from related audiences is to give them value first. Any thoughts about that strategy? How to do that better?
That is a great strategy where you getting out in front of the audience of other shows that are similar to yours is a great way to grow your show. It really depends on the genre you're in, right? Some genres do really good for that interview process. Some not so well. It just depends on the type of shows. True crime podcasts are less likely to have interviews. History ones less likely to have interviews. But that doesn't mean there aren't some that do. I mean, they're definitely, Hardcore History has the Hardcore History Addendum. So where he brings on a guest and they talk. So Dan has that. And Dan definitely grew his show and helped actually grow Rogan. They helped each other grow back in the day. Because Dan Carlin, for the longest time, was the largest show on a per episode basis. And a lot of people don't realize that, but on a per episode basis, Dan Carlin was the first show really to regularly get over 1 million downloads an episode on a regular basis, long before anyone else did.
And no one really talks about him as being up there with the Joe Rogan, and that kind of.
Yeah, his audience is still huge. I mean, he'll release a new episode, and I'll look at the numbers, and in just a matter of a couple of hours, he'll get more than on that episode than I will get on mine in a month. And I'm just like, oh. So I said, Dan helped me to stop looking at my stats.
Yeah. Why does him being successful, why did that help you stop looking at your stats?
Because then I was like, okay, I'm a rounding error to what Dan gets and what Joe Rogan gets. And I'm like, okay, so it doesn't really matter anymore. So I stopped obsessing over my stats. I'll have people, still to this day, we'll have people that will tell me they look at their stats in the Libsyn system every hour on the day they release an episode. They'll release an episode at 6 a.m, then they log in at 7 and 8, at 9, at 10 and 11. They want to see where that episode is download wise. And they'll email me and they'll say, well, is there something wrong with the stats? They're not updating normally by 11 o'clock. I have this many downloads. What's going on? And I'm like, are you looking every hour? And they go, yes. Every time I release an episode, I look every hour. I'm like, oh my! I'm like, stop! No. But I try to tell people, when you look at your stats for the last episode, right after you publish the next episode, that's your reward. That's how I do. That's where I'm at. My reward for me is when I publish an episode, I get to look at the last episode stats.
I think I read somewhere where Joe Rogan said he didn't look at his stats for like the first 5 years that he was doing his show. Is that truthful, or did I get bad information?
Joe he really doesn't care about stats. So Joe Rogan was the first show to hit 1 billion downloads, well before anyone else. And when he hit 1 billion downloads, I emailed him as he was getting close to 1 billion. I emailed him, said, hey, we'd love to do a press release, talk about you being the first person to 1 billion downloads, da-da-da-da-da. He's like, no. I'm like, what? So we wrote the press release and we sent it to him. Go, this would be the release. And you could change the quote however you want it. Here it is. It's already done, right? We're not charging you anything. We want to do this press release. He's like, no. I said, no, I'm not interested in doing it. I'm like, okay. So Then he comes up on 2 billion, and we're like, okay, do you want to do it for 2 billion? He's like, no. And then right after that, it was Stuff You Should Know or something like that, hit 1 billion. And then they did a press release, first podcast to 1 billion. So I sent Joe the release. I said, Joe, this could have been you. I go, can we do one when you hit 2.5? I go, because you're already past 2. I go, can we do one? No. And he wouldn't do it at 2.5. I hit him up at 3. I hit him at 4. And then he left when he had that about 4.5 billion. So he really didn't want any press around his numbers.
Why? What
doesn't
drove
care.
that?
He doesn't. That's not what drives him.
Yeah.
And it's just it's just who he is.
What does drive Joe Rogan?
I think learning from the guests he brings on, and getting in conversations. And I think that's what drives him, having those long form conversations. And then he's got a very good group of people. You talk about people going on his show, there was the Rogan effect. If you got on Joe Rogan, boom, you'd see this spike in your numbers. And so there was definitely a good correlation. So back to, getting on other people's podcasts definitely help if they have an audience. Now there's a lot of podcasts that don't have audiences, but anything helps, right? Even if they have an audience of 100, you get on, you pick up 2 listeners, you never know who one of those 2 might be. It could be the most important person in your field, in your niche, and getting that person from the other show made it worthwhile.
Today's episode of Podcasting Secrets is brought to you by Pod Allies, the done-for-you podcasting services solution. When I speak with CEOs about their podcast, one of the most common comments that I hear is that they know they need a podcast, but they don't have time. Have you ever wondered how some businesses find a way to still run their podcasts while juggling their crazy day-to-day operations? The secret might be simpler than you think. Let me introduce you to Pod Allies. This is a service that's changed the game for businesses in the podcasting world. Pod Allies is a done-for-you podcast production and marketing service. They understand that while many businesses understand the immense value podcasting can have for their business, finding time to produce, syndicate, promote, and monetize a show can be challenging. Pod Allies offers a dedicated team to handle virtually all aspects of your podcast production. From strategy and branding to audio and video editing and guest scheduling, they've got you covered. They even take care of creating blog posts, transcripts, and syndicating your content across multiple platforms. What sets Pod Allies apart is their use of PodUp, their proprietary podcasting software suite. This allows them to streamline the entire podcasting process, saving you time, effort, and a bunch of money. If you're ready to become a thought leader, connect with your audience, and grow your business through podcasting without all of the investment of time and cost of doing it yourself, Pod Allies might be the perfect solution for you. To learn more or to schedule a free consultation with a podcast expert, visit podallies.com. That's podallies.com. Now back to the show. Okay, let's say your best friend from college is the CEO of a company, and he chosen to put his company online. And he called you up and said, okay, tell me how I need to do this, how I need to be successful. What advice would you give him? What are the most important things that you would tell him in launching his business podcast?
Launching his business podcast, the first thing I would tell him is don't launch with 10 episodes, launch with 1 or 2, and figure out who your audience is and make sure the title of your podcast really is relevant to who your target audience is. I think the biggest mistake people make on launching a podcast is mistitling their podcast. They title it something cute or funny or inside baseballish, when reality is you just need to think about what would people search for to find this podcast.
Yeah,
and
that is so true.
Right. Just make that the title. What's the first keyword you would pay money for if you want to promote your podcast? What's the first word you would look at if you're trying to find competitive podcasts around your topic? What is that first word? If that's not the first word in the title of your podcast is titled wrong. I recently launched one just to have some fun and see if I did no promotion and just to see what would happen if I could get an audience from it if I titled it right. and it was JFK files. And I did it around the time of the JFK files coming out, and I titled it JFK files. That's it. That's the title. And boom, came up. When you search JFK file, boom, it would be there. It'd be in the predictive results. It'd be in the results when you hit search, because I titled it what people were going to be searching for. So and if you're not sure, if there's a few words, right? If 2 or 3 words, 4 words, you're not sure which one's the right one, go to Google Trends and see which one is trending higher for searches and pick that.
Or use a tool like SEMrush that could help you, or Ahrefs. Okay, so let me give you an example. So if, let's say I was a Chinese adoption agency and I was doing a podcast, you might be tempted to call your podcast something like The Red Thread or something, thinking you were being creative. But if you were doing it, you'd just call it China Adoption or Chinese Adoption or
Chinese Adoption Podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Because no one's going to go to Google, or no one's going to go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and type The Red Thread. And if you title it the China Adoption Podcast, you're probably going to come up for what people are actually searching for.
Correct. I mean, there was an example. We had a podcast meetup group in Kansas City when I lived in Kansas City, and a friend of mine had a podcast called the Fifth Race Podcast, and and you'd have no idea what it was about by that name, unless you were really a big Stargate insider sci-fi fan. And Fifth Race was a reference inside Stargate, and that was his title, the Fifth Race Podcast, nothing else. And I just said, just change it. I go to Fifth Race, the unofficial Stargate podcast, because when you search for Stargate, his podcast didn't show up at all. And he changed that at the beginning of a podcast meetup. 2 hours later, at the end of the meetup, we went and searched an Apple podcast for Stargate, and his was the first thing that came up. So Apple updated that quickly. So changing your podcast, the title, and seeing how you show up in search results is not something you have to wait weeks or months to find out the results for. You can find out really quickly. You can change your title multiple times. Right? You can do some A/B testing and see how it works out. You can see the trends, how many new people are signing up. So 1 month you may want to try one title, and the next month try a different title and see which month got more new signups.
That is a really good idea. A/B testing your title.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard that before, but that's profound advice.
Now, I will say this. If you're changing the title of your podcast and it's already established, your artwork, you can change it in the artwork, but keep the color scheme and the basic images the same.
Yeah.
Because people glance through their artwork, glance their phone in the car, and they're looking for the show to listen to. They know your artwork. They know the coloring. You don't want to change it where you have a blue themed artwork and you change the title. Now you're a red themed artwork, because they may miss your podcast totally because they didn't hear that you changed the title. So keep the artwork as close as possible, especially when not counting the words, but everything else around it. Try to keep it the same while you're going through this testing of your titles.
Yeah. What is one of the most challenging things that you've had to go through in your podcasting journey? And how'd you get through it?
Challenging, I would say, is just educating people to keep podcasting the main thing. There's so many times where people that are podcasters that are doing well, that they get distracted on the shiny thing, be it Second Life, be it live audio streaming, now video. A lot of times you've got these people that are audio podcasts, they're successful, they have a good size audience, and the trend of the day is something else. And so then they run off and they go do this other thing and neglect back to their core audience and show of what they were doing and changing the format of the show, and alienate their audience. So I think the biggest challenge was a lot of times helping people from self-sabotaging their own shows and their audiences. You can do other things to promote, but if you're not good live, don't do live. If you're not good on video, don't do video. If you're happy doing audio, there's no reason you have to do video. Majority of podcasts, their audience is in the audio. There's more time in the day to consume audio. It's easier to produce. There's more places to consume audio than there is video. So there's a lot of advantage in doing audio. And I'm not saying don't do video, but I'm saying if you don't want to do video, doing audio just because everyone says it's the thing to do is the wrong reason to do it.
Yeah. So you talked about these these ways that podcasters self-sabotage. What are some of the biggest ways that podcasters are self-sabotaging, or the biggest mistakes that they're making that are shooting themselves in the foot? And how do we avoid those?
Obviously, changing the format around. I don't like this one. The people who have done this is they have a long form show and they think they get here, oh, you got to be short. And they take a longer episode that's an hour and a half or something, and they cut it into little 20-minute blocks and release it as individual episodes because someone said, oh, no, you need to be under 22 minutes on an episode. And the reality is, no, don't do that. People actually like longer form content. People actually like the fact that they can hit play in the kitchen and listen as they walk out to the car, get in the car, drive to work, listen from the car to the cubicle, right? So kitchen to cubicle consumption is more than 20 minutes. It's a lot of times for people, it's an hour and a half. And if they don't have to change episodes in the between the kitchen and the cubicle, they're appreciative of that. That's one thing, is don't change because you heard some person in radio expertise saying do this or do that. Listen to your audience. And then that's the other thing, self-sabotage. People just don't get feedback from their audience. They don't ask for it, or they don't listen to it when they do get it.
What are the best ways to ask for that feedback and receive that feedback?
Multiple times in an episode. Ask at the beginning of the episode, ask in the middle of the episode, ask at the end of the episode. Making it easy, putting it in the show notes. Here's the email address to email us at. Here's the call-in number. Making it really dead simple for anyone that subscribes to your podcast to give you feedback. Having a place on your website for them to send you feedback. Those are things that a lot of podcasters don't do today. A lot of new podcasters, they don't do that. And I think the old timers understood that, and they got it, and the OGs always had multiple ways. But a lot of the new podcasters today, I'll listen and I'll hear trailers, and they won't mention anything in the trailer about how to give them feedback. And like, Rob, why would you ask for feedback in the trailer? Because you're introducing people to see that trailer at some point. Listen to it at a later time. Ask for the feedback from day one. Let your audience know that they're part of your show from day one. That's again,
wise.
Not something that a lot of new podcasters are doing.
Where do you think the future of podcasting is going?
If you ask Grok or any of the other AIs, they'll tell you AI integration with your workflow. And they'll also tell you video. But I think AI tools, not for the creation of the content, but AI tools for the research, AI tools to help parse through things to get you stuff, are definitely helping or can help a podcaster. But the creation of the content still needs to be you and your voice, and that's what your audience is there for. They're not there for what Grok spit out and you reading it verbatim. They want to get your personality, your feedback, your opinion on things. And just like teachers know when you used Grok, the audience knows when you used Grok or ChatGPT. Right? It just becomes apparent to the audience.
Yeah.
So I
agreed.
Yeah. And then the other thing is true crime podcasts, right? 18 of the top 25 in 2024 were true crime podcasts. For some reason, that's still a place where top podcasts come out of that genre. Now, I would have said a couple of years ago, we've got enough true crime podcasts, but evidently we do not.
So find your niche in true crime, huh? So you've been doing this 20 years. You've been podcasting for decades. What keeps you going after all this time?
I just have fun doing it. To me, this is like golf for my dad or tennis for my cousin. This is just a hobby, right? And something I enjoy doing, and talking with the audience and interacting with the audience or guests, and researching. I like researching the topics I'm covering and learning about something. So I like, interacting and learning. Those are the two things I like out of podcasting, and I have fun with it. And I can always find another topic. If I have a topic, some people are like, oh, I want to learn about a topic. When I think about, hey, I want to learn about a topic, I'm going to launch a podcast on it. And that's how I'm going to learn about it. And that's the best way for me to learn about a topic, is launch a podcast on it. And Dave Jackson is a a great example of someone who's done that. He's had 30 different podcasts. You want to learn about something? He wants to learn about losing weight. He launches a podcast on losing weight. He wants to learn about building a deck. He's going to do something about woodworking. Whatever it is he wants to learn about, Dave will launch a podcast on it. May not last forever, but not all podcasts do, and they're not meant to.
That's right. And a lot of people are even being able to sell their podcasts if you get it up and going. You don't have to keep doing it forever.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I launched Podcast 401 in 2004, and it ran for 200 plus episodes. Eventually, I'll bring it back. I just don't have the time to put into it, because when I did the interviews, I did a lot of research on the guests and took a lot of time. And then I had Today in iOS, which is about the iPhone, and I launched that because I wanted an excuse to buy an iPhone that I could give to my wife. And I ran that for many years, 500 something episodes. And then I moved and work got in the way, and I couldn't put the research into it, so I kind of paused it. But I've always continued, I always had a podcast going. I've got the feed going with Elsie, because I love, still researching about podcasting, and that podcast forces me a couple times a month to really dig into the podcast space and get what some of the newest news is and other answers are.
Yeah. Tell me more about that show. Tell me about the feed. Tell me about maybe an episode that's really stood out to you from that show.
First, I got to give credit to Elsie Escobar, my co-host, because Elsie does the hard work. She does the post-production and the gathering and the scheduling and everything. I just show up and I do some research, and then I show up and I talk about what I researched on. So I have the fun part, I say. Elsie's got the more of the mundane. She puts the show notes together, gets everything together. She does the hard part of it. So that's always good to have if you can get a co-host that's going to do the part you don't like to do, like the show notes. It's good to have someone like that. But I think of the feed, it's just the predictions that we've made along the way about things that have come to pass that we've nailed along the way. We would say, hey, don't do this and watch out for that. I think we recorded an episode right before the last election, and we recorded it the week before. So it came out the morning of the election. And in that recording from the week before, I said, why I think Harris is going to lose was she did not embrace podcasting.
Yes.
And I said, if I'm wrong, forget everything I just said, but I go really strong feeling that she was going to lose. She did 2 interviews. They were horrible. If you looked at the numbers on how many downloads she had gotten for the Shay interview and how many she'd gotten for Call Her Daddy, and then compared that to what Trump was getting for his interviews, it was worlds apart on the numbers. And then Trump was out doing a lot of interviews, and he was making himself available. And it just showed one embraced podcasting, one didn't. And I really felt that her weakness was that people didn't know who she was. And she had so many opportunities to get out there. She should have been on Rogan, could have been on Rogan. She should have been on the Joe Budden podcast, which is the biggest one for African-American males. And she wasn't on that podcast. And I'm like, and they're saying at the time, her numbers are hurting with African-American males. Why are you not on that? Her team didn't even reach out to Joe Budden's team. I mean, that would, to me, her team, her social media team, her marketing team was completely incompetent and really let her down, because her biggest weakness, they could have addressed with podcasting, and they didn't. Came out in the results.
When Obama won, I think he won because he leveraged social media better than any president had ever done before.
Absolutely.
Him. Yeah. And you could just see it happening with Harris. She not only did she only do those 2 shows, but I think if I remember right, I could be remembering wrong, it was at least reported that she paid 6 figures to even get on that Call Her Daddy show.
Oh, yeah.
And which took away all that credibility,
and then they had vetted questions, and it was
yeah.
She wouldn't go.
It wasn't real. It wasn't authentic. It wasn't fun to listen to, and I think Trump won because just like Obama had used the new media form better than anyone else had with social media, I think Trump used podcasting better than any other presidential candidate had, and I think the takeaway, the lesson from that is there'll be some new form of media, right? As the new election cycles come around in the future. And I think the candidates need to be quick to be the one to embrace that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the next election cycle, we said, the next election cycle, especially for presidential, it's going to start on the candidates that emerge out of the primaries are going to be the ones that best embraced podcasting. And then you're going to have two candidates that come out from both parties on the next time that have already well embraced podcasting, because whoever wins on the Democratic primary, whoever wins on, unless the DNC fixes it again, and whoever wins on the Republican side are going to be the candidates that best used podcasting to really do long form interviews to really explain who they were and get their ideas out there and educate their base, which again, Harris did a really bad job at. Trump did a really good job at, and
they won't make that mistake again next time. They will fix that. Okay. Rob, thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate the value that you're added for our audience. If our audience enjoyed it as I have, and they want to learn more about you and your work, what are the best ways for them to do that?
Well, they can check us out, the feed. We release a new episode every other week. The feed .libsyn.com, or you can just search the feed and Libsyn in any whatever you consume podcast. Or if you have questions, you can email me, rob@libsyn.com. So Rob is in Robert, ROB@LIBSYN.com, and happy to answer any questions they have.
And if they want to try out your software, where's the
go to Libsyn.com. So, and that is where you go to host your podcast. And we've been hosting podcasts for 20 plus years. So you don't have to worry once you move there. You don't have to worry about us closing down. We'll be here.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Rob.
Nathan, thank you for having me on the show. Appreciate it.